tonight's presentation, the desire of ages. So, Prophet Daniel was having another vision. He had another view of the future. And in Daniel 8, he sees two beasts fighting it out. It's quite a startling picture that he gets. And again, he saw a terrible power arising at the end of time. But this time, this power came and was perverting the worship of God. So now he's progressed from Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the statue of Daniel chapter 2, his own dream in Daniel chapter 7, where he saw these beasts that ended up with this great and terrible beast at the end of time. Now he's seeing that there's the end of time powers again, but the last one was perverting the worship of God. And then he heard what is described as being two saints who are giving the length of time of the worship of this power. And he heard them speaking, and one of them said, "How long is this power going to continue?" And the other one, it says in Daniel chapter 8:14, he said unto me, "Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed." Now, Daniel is being told the meaning of what he's seen in Daniel chapter 8, but he can't bear what he's actually seeing, and he faints. So without getting a full understanding of what's being revealed to him, he's dropped, and he goes back and he starts to study scripture again, and he starts to pray about this. And after some time, Daniel begins to realize, he looks at Jeremiah's prophecy, and he says, "Is this time filled up now? Hasn't the time finished when we should be coming out of captivity? Because the Lord said we will go into captivity for a certain amount of time, and then we will go back." And so now Daniel is on his knees, he's petitioning God as to whether Israel's time in captivity is over. And also he wants to have a greater understanding of Daniel chapter 8, the vision that he's just had, and also he wants to know particularly, what does this mean? 2,300 days, and then the sanctuary will be cleansed. Well, an angel is sent to him. Now, the angel is detained for some time. It almost seems like there's a battle that goes on between the forces of good and the forces of evil, until eventually this angel comes to explain to Daniel, right, this is the meaning of chapter 8 and verse 14. And this is what he says. We find this in Daniel chapter 9 and verse 24. And he says, 70 weeks are decreed upon thy people. Now, we're going to look at this in a little bit more detail and see exactly what the meaning is here. But it's 70 weeks are decreed upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish transgression and to make an end of sins and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up the vision and the prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Now, here there is this interesting term that is used. It says there's 70 weeks are determined. And this word determined, what it actually means is literally, it means to be cut off. All of the Hebrews, the people who study Hebrew, say that, yes, the word that's used here, it means literally to cut something off or separate something from something. And then the other thing it mentions here is that a time is determined for Daniel's people. Now, the question that we have to ask is, well, then, what is this time that is cut off? What's it cut off from? Presumably, it's cut off from Daniel 8:14. It's cut off from this time, 2,300 days, and then will the sanctuary be cleansed? Now, the problem with this is here that we're going to start to get into a little bit of mathematics. We're going to have this, we've got this 2,300 days. We're then going to have this 70 weeks that is being cut off. we're going to get a little bit confused. So what I've done is made a chart so that we can actually look at a chart and get a pictorial representation of what we're speaking about. So here we go. We've got 2,300 days. That's the yellow line there. The bar determines that length of time. And we know that from that length of time, 70 weeks has been determined or has been cut off from this period. And it says 70 weeks is determined, cut off from this period to make an end of sins. Now, as you can probably see there, I haven't actually made this to scale because I want us to be able to get an idea of what's actually being spoken of. But you might see immediately we have got one big problem. The problem is simply this. We have this period of time which is just floating around. We know that this period is divided off into two sections at the moment, but we don't know when this period of time actually starts. So we need something that's going to tell us where can we anchor this, where can we put this in time to know, particularly for Daniel, is it past, is it present, is it future, when is it referring to? Well, the next verse in Daniel chapter 9:25, it says this: know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and rebuild Jerusalem unto the anointed one, the prince, and then it says there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, and it shall be built again with street and moat, even in troublous times. So it says there's going to be the rebuilding that's going to take place, and from the time that the commandment goes forward to actually rebuild Jerusalem unto the anointed one. So there's this time now being determined. You'll notice there's also another division in the time as well. If we go back to our chart, we can actually add another division in of, or two divisions. In fact, we've got 7 weeks, then we've got 62 weeks. 7 weeks and 62 weeks until the prince, and then the wall's going to be built in trouble. Will be built in troublous times as well. And then we've got the last week of this 70-week period. So we've got a 70-week period that's now been divided up into a 7-week period, a 62-week period, and then 1 week left over at the end. This is all cut out of the 2,300 days. Does it give us any information? Does it help us to anchor this period of time in time? Well, notice it says from the going forth of the command to rebuild Jerusalem. So the question is going to be, when did this command go forth? Well, if we look at the book of Ezra, in Ezra chapter 7 and verse 7, it says, and there went up some of the children of Israel, and of the priests, and of the Levites, of the singers and the porters, and the Nethinims, unto Jerusalem in the 7th year of Artaxerxes the king. So now here we've got this idea that in the 7th year of Artaxerxes the king, this command is going to go forward. And then if we look at the next verse, it tells us that they actually went to Jerusalem in the 5th month, which was in the 7th year of the king. So if we can know when the command went out from Artaxerxes to rebuild Jerusalem, then we know when is the beginning of this prophecy. Now, the great thing is that we can see that there were certain commands to go and rebuild. They're there in Ezra chapter 7. In fact, if you look at verse 1 and you look at verse 8 as well, 7 and 8 there, and in verse 9, you will see these decrees to go forward, to go up to Jerusalem and start this building. When did this actually happen? Do we have any idea of when it happened? Well, thankfully, we have got some idea. Here's Ezra chapter 7 and verse 13, where you see Artaxerxes' decree there. I make a decree that all the people of Israel, their priests and the Levites in my realm, which are minded of their own free will to go to Jerusalem, go with thee. And so we can now date this, because thankfully Ptolemy, the Roman historian, and Sir Isaac Newton, they have been able to calculate, they've been able to look at the history, and they said actually the 7th year of Artaxerxes was 457 BC. So here we have this starting date, 457 BC. Let's go back, let's change the chart. We can start 457 BC. That's when the decree went. That's when the people went back to Jerusalem to rebuild it. Now, the problem is, how long did it take to complete the wall of the city? Well, actually, we know how long it took, because we know that it took 49 years. In 408 BC, the wall of the city was completed. But immediately you're going to say, wait a minute, that's way longer than 7 weeks. So how does this fit in with the prophecy says that the wall's going to be rebuilt in 7 weeks? But look, 49 years, that's how long it took. Well, we're going to go back to a Bible prophecy principle that we've looked at before. In fact, in the very first study that we did, we actually looked at this principle. The principle is found in the book of Ezekiel, and in Ezekiel chapter 4 and verse 6, it says there, and when you have accomplished them, this is what God had told Ezekiel to do, lie again on your right side, and you'll bear the iniquity of the house of Judah 40 days. I've appointed thee each day for a year. Ezekiel was appointed to go and lie on one side and lie on the other side because of the iniquity of the houses of Israel and Judah. And God said, you're going to do it for 40 days because it represents the 40 years that I am speaking about, because every day that you do it represents a year. So now that's the first introduction to that principle. But as always with Bible principles, we don't rely on one testimony or one witness. It's a bit like a court of law. You want 2 witnesses to establish the case. And so we go to the book of Numbers, and in Numbers chapter 14 and verse 34, exactly the same principle. Children of Israel went in to search out the promised land. They came back and said, oh, the giants in there, we can't take it. And God was actually angry with them because he said, you've got no faith. If I'm leading you, don't you think I can lead you in? He said, all right, you went and searched out the land for 40 days. I'm going to turn you around. You're going back into the wilderness. 40 years you'll spend in the wilderness, each day for a year. So there is this principle, Ezekiel 4:6 and Numbers 14:34. A day in prophecy represents a year. So let's go back to our chart and let's change that. So the 7 weeks, well, 7 weeks of 7 days, that's 7 times 7, 49. There we go, 49 years. That's exactly how long it took for the wall to be built, 457 BC to 408 BC. Now, also, of course, we can't leave the 62 weeks, the 70 weeks, and the 2,300 days all being the same as well. So we're going to change those, and you will see that we've now got the time left there. The 62 weeks becomes 434 years. The 2,300 days becomes 2,300 years. And so we're now looking at this bottom period here, this 17-week period. Now, if you've got 49 years bringing you to 408 BC, you've got 434 years that are going to take you from 408 BC. Where are they going to take you up to? Let's have a look at what it says on the chart. It brings you up. Now, I don't know if you've done the calculations, but if you have done the calculations, you will see that it brings us up to 27 AD. Now, somebody might say, wait a minute, John, if I subtract 408 from 434, Well, actually, I'm left with 26. Yes, you'd be absolutely right. But remember, when we're going from BC to AD, there is no year zero. So you go from 1 BC to 1 AD. So that means that when we add these numbers up, we come to 27 AD. We've added that onto the chart. And so now we're going to look a little bit more closely at this 70-week period. We know that it begins in 457 BC. We know that at the end of the 69 weeks, we come to 27 AD, and this then brings us up to the last week of that prophetic period. Well, of course, that last week, it's going to be 7 days, or in prophetic time, it's going to be 7 years. So let's ask the question here. What happened in 27 AD that brings us to the beginning of this week? What happened? In the prophecy, Daniel was told it was to bring the anointed one. The word anointed, Christ was anointed, and the word Messiah means anointed. So when we talk about the anointed one, we're talking about the Messiah coming. We've got somebody else coming as well. Somebody else just joined us. So the word Messiah means the anointed one. When was Jesus anointed? When was Jesus baptized? Well, if we turn to Luke chapter 3 and verses 1 and 21, it tells us there that in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, when all the people were baptized. So here we have this time beginning in 27 AD when Christ was going to be baptized. And here it says, Luke 3:21, Jesus also, having been baptized and praying, the heavens were opened, or heaven was opened. When did this happen? The 15th year of Tiberius Caesar. That's what Luke tells us. And that was 27 AD. In fact, Christ was baptized exactly at the time when that last week of Daniel's prophecy was going to begin. So we can even go back to our chart and we can say 27 AD, what happened there? Jesus Christ was baptized exactly as predicted. In fact, Christ himself recognized what was happening at that time. Despite the fact that as a nation, the Jews rejected him out of hand, he knew what was happening. He went into the synagogue, Mark chapter 1 and verse 15, and he said, the time is fulfilled, the kingdom of God is at hand. Repent and believe in the gospel. Now, Christ knew that his ministry had begun at that time, but Christ's ministry only lasted for a certain amount of time. In fact, his ministry lasted for 3.5 years. Now, if we count 3.5 years from the autumn of 27 AD, now I'm saying the autumn of 27 AD for two reasons. One, because the decree to go out and rebuild Jerusalem happened in the autumn. Also, we know that the Bible tells us Christ was on or around his 30th birthday when he began his ministry. 30 years old was the time when you were, for the Jews, it was a time of maturity. It was a time when you went into your ministry. And so at that time, 31 AD, Christ has done his ministry for 3.5 years. Now it's 31 AD because we start in the autumn of AD 27. Oh, I forgot something. Talking about his ministry and his birthday, when was Christ born? Now, you know, the world says Christ was born on the 25th of December. And so everybody celebrates 25th of December, that's when Christ was born. But I think you may remember that when we looked at the religion of 666, we saw that actually 25th of December was the birthday of Mithra. Does the Bible give us any idea of when Christ was born, of when his birthday was. Well, the interesting thing is that when you look at the Bible, it doesn't actually tell you, it doesn't say this is Christ's birthday, but it does give you a time of year when Christ could not have been born. Any idea what time of year he could not have been born? If you're saying winter time, you're absolutely right. Why do we know that?
December.
Yeah, December. It couldn't have been December. The reason, very simply, because the shepherds were up on the hills and they were there with their sheep on the hillside. Now, if you were a decent shepherd, you wouldn't be taking your sheep up on the hills at a time like this. What you would actually be doing, if it was winter time, you would be taking your sheep down into the village. You would be keeping them in your home. In fact, that was where you would have your sheep, solely the reason being because you're looking after your sheep. It was like your pet. You weren't going to have them getting cold and frozen on a mountaintop. So Christ could have been born spring, summer, autumn, but he definitely wasn't born in the winter time. So that's why we say autumn of 27 AD. So if we count the autumn of 27 AD, a 3.5 year ministry will bring us, the half a year brings us to the spring of 28 AD, and then the 3 years on top brings us to the spring of 31 AD. Now, what happened in 31 AD in the springtime? Well, yes, it was the end of his ministry. That was when the crucifixion of Christ took place at Passover. Passover time, as you know, is around the springtime. And in fact, Daniel chapter 9 and verse 27 says, and he will make a firm covenant with many for 1 week, and for the half of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. So in the middle of the week, Christ the Messiah would cause the sacrifice to cease. Now, how would he cause the sacrifice to cease? He was the Passover lamb. That particular Passover, there was no need to take a lamb and to sacrifice it because Christ was there. Christ was the lamb. And something incredible happened at that time to signify that Christ was the lamb. The high priest holding the lamb was getting ready to cut the lamb's throat, to kill the lamb as a sacrifice, and then all of a sudden the lamb kicked up and struggled and jumped out of his arms. This never happened before. The high priest always had a tight hold on the lamb to make sure it couldn't get away, but this year he got away. And then something incredible happened. The temple curtain, the curtain that divided the holy place from the most holy place, was torn in half as if taken by two unseen hands, and it was taken and it was torn from top to bottom, not from bottom to top, top to bottom. And this signifies that the sacrificial system was over. In fact, we're told it's in Mark chapter 15 and verse 38. We're told that this happened. Now, what was so significant about this? You know, in the holy place, there was the holy place where sacrifices took place, but then there was the most holy place. Now, in the most holy place, that was where you had the Ark of the Covenant. And once a year on the Day of Atonement, the high priest was allowed to go into the most holy place. He would make atonement for himself, make sacrifice for himself and his family, and then he would take the atonement for the whole of the children of Israel, and he would sprinkle the blood on the horns of the altar. As I say, he was the only one that was allowed to do it. And the children of Israel, as they were there, they would see him go into the curtain, but then they had to wait. If he came out from behind the curtain, they knew the sacrifice had been accepted. Israel would continue for the next year with their sins forgiven. If, however, he didn't come out, that meant the sacrifice wasn't accepted and Israel's sin remained with them. Now, to make sure the people didn't worry too much, part of the design of the high priest costume was that on the border of the garment at the very bottom, there were little silver bells that were sewn in there. They alternated between a bell and a pomegranate, but they made this tinkling sound. So as the high priest went behind that curtain and he moved from part to part, performing the sacrifices, so anybody outside the curtain could hear the tinkling of the little bells, and they could say, we know he's alive, God is accepting the sacrifice. And then he would come out again and they would say, oh, now we know sacrifice has been accepted, our sins have been forgiven, and the next year starts again. But now, AD 31, Christ is crucified and the curtain is torn in half. And in fact, if you had been there, if you'd been in the holy place, no doubt anybody there would have cowered in fear, because it was on the Ark of the Covenant where the Shekinah glory, the presence of God, would come down into the temple. You know, sometimes the Shekinah glory would come down and would fill out the most holy place and would spread into the holy place. Sometimes the Shekinah glory was so bright it would spill out into the temple, and this was the brightness of the glory of God. So people were very afraid. It was almost like they could feel God's brightness. But on this particular day, if you had looked through that veil, you would have seen, in fact, that the Ark of the Covenant wasn't there. The Ark of the Covenant had been lost many years before, and the priests had been going through a pretense of what they did because they didn't actually know where the Ark of the Covenant was. Well, be that as it may, God signified this is an end of sacrifice. No need to do any more sacrifices because Christ has been sacrificed. Christ, who was the sacrifice that all the other sacrifices pointed to. In the midst of the week, he has been cut off, but he has caused the sacrifice to cease. Now, this is only halfway through the week, so we've got another 3.5 years to go. Let's add the 3.5 years on to 31 AD, and we get to 34 AD. Now, what happened of significance in 34 AD? Now, the interesting thing is, Christ has been crucified, he is risen, he's gone up to heaven, he said to his apostles, wait in Jerusalem and the Holy Spirit will come, and then once you've got the Holy Spirit, then you will preach the gospel. And what happened when we get to that period of time? Acts chapter 7 tells us there that Stephen was preaching to the Jews, and Stephen was telling the Jews off. He was saying to them, look, you've been saying that you're waiting for the Messiah. The Messiah came, and what did you do? You took him and you killed him. And if you read this passage in the book of Acts, you will see there's a rather interesting phrase there. When the people that were listening to him, they were so angry, it said they gnashed at him, they gnawed at him with their teeth. Now what that means is they were so angry that they couldn't speak. You ever had that experience when you get so angry your teeth kind of clench? And this is how they found. They were so annoyed at Stephen, they fell on him, they threw him out of the city, and they stoned him to death. At that time, they signified their rejection of the Christian message, the message of the Messiah that was being preached in Jerusalem. Now, in Acts chapter 1 and verse 8, if you write this one down, I haven't got this on the screen, but Acts chapter 1 and verse 8, Christ tells his disciples, he says, look, this is how the gospel will be spread. First of all, it's going to be in Jerusalem. Then you'll go into Judea and Samaria, and then you will go into the whole world. Now, the apostles, they had remained in Jerusalem. They'd been doing their work in Jerusalem. But suddenly, after the stoning of Stephen, Acts chapter 8 and verse 1, it says, and at that time there was a great persecution against the church which was at Jerusalem, and they were all scattered abroad throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. Now, notice that if you reflect on Acts chapter 1 verse 8, Christ saying, first of all Jerusalem, then Judea and Samaria, we might ask ourselves, why would Christ allow persecution to come upon the church right at the very beginning of the church? But look at the result. Because of that persecution, they were scattered abroad, and they went into Judea and Samaria. They fulfilled what Christ said to them, this is the way that the word will be spread. And in fact, in Acts chapter 8 and verse 4, it says, therefore they that were scattered abroad went everywhere preaching the word. That's what they did. They were Christians. They went off. They preached the word. So at that time, Stephen was martyred. He was stoned to death. And the gospel was opened up to the Gentiles as well. The time of the gospel being only for the Jews was now ended. And now also here ends the 70 weeks of Daniel's prophecy. Now, I want to emphasize this, that the 70 weeks are over, because there are some people, when they're looking at this prophecy, for some reason they don't separate the 70 weeks away from the 2,300 days. They actually separate the 69 weeks away, and then the last week that's left, they throw it. For some reason, they throw it far into the future. They say it hasn't happened yet. We haven't been through that last week. And they talk about a week of tribulation. They even talk about the rapture happening in the middle of that week. But there's no rhyme or reason for doing that, because the 70 weeks, that's what was cut off for Daniel and his people. So if 70 weeks was cut off, we expect to see the 70 weeks altogether. So there we had it. We had the first 7 weeks to rebuild the wall of Jerusalem and to establish Jerusalem again. We then had that time of the Jews right up to 27 AD, and then that last week from 27 AD through to 34 AD, and then the gospel goes out. At that time, the Jews had rejected Christ. Pilate presented them to the people and said, do you want to have your Messiah? And they said, no, we're going to reject him. And where did Christ go at that time? He ascended into heaven. In fact, we are told that he went to sit at the right hand of God in Hebrews chapter 8 and verse 1. Now, Hebrews chapter 9 verse 24 tells us that Christ is not entered into the holy places made with hands. He went to the temple, he went to the sanctuary, he went to the tabernacle, but he went to the heavenly one. It says here, it doesn't go into the one that was made by hands, which is the figure of the true, but he went into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God for us. This is where Christ is ministering for us. Paul says that whilst the earthly temple stood, the heavenly service was not, in fact, could not be carried out, because it had to be when Christ went to heaven. Paul says in Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 8, the Holy Ghost is signifying that the way into the holiest of all, this is the heavenly sanctuary, was not yet made manifest, whereas the first tabernacle was still standing. And he goes on to say that this was a figure for that time. It wasn't actually, this wasn't the real place where everything was going to take place, where sin was going to be got rid of. This was just a figure for the time then present. This is Hebrews 9 and verse 9. And Paul says, in which were offered both gifts and sacrifices that could not make him that did the service perfect as pertaining to the conscience. Then the Jews continued with the sacrificial service. After 34 AD, they continued for the next 36 years until 70 AD. 70 AD, the Roman Emperor Titus sent his army to besiege Jerusalem, and after a lengthy and horrific besiegement, he sent his soldiers in. They broke the walls down and they entered into Jerusalem. Now, he actually had some respect for the temple, and he said to his soldiers, he said, when you get into there, don't break down the temple, don't wreck the temple. Unfortunately, a fire broke out in the temple, and soldiers saw the flickering flames through windows into the temple, and they thought they saw gold glittering inside the temple. And soldiers being soldiers, they said, well, there's gold in there, let's go and break it down. And that's what they did. The temple was broken down just as Christ said it would be. And not only did they break down the temple, but they also took off all the temple furniture. Here is a frieze that was sculpted at the time, Romans showing themselves coming back out of Jerusalem, carrying all the booty that they had, and they showed themselves carrying the holy objects that they found in the temple. Here you can see the 7-branch candlestick they're carrying. But the interesting thing is, as you look down this frieze, it's now in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. If you look down this frieze, the one thing you will not see there, guess what it is? Well, yes, it's the Ark of the Covenant, because as I say, it wasn't there. They couldn't find the Ark of the Covenant because it was hidden away. So what's happened? Christ has gone into heaven. He has become the high priest. Hebrews chapter 8 and verse 1, Paul says, now the things which we have spoken, this is the sum. We have such a high priest who is set on the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens, a minister of the sanctuary and of the true tabernacle which the Lord pitched and not man. So that's where Christ went. He went to be the high priest in the sanctuary, according to Paul. But you may have worked out that we didn't actually finish off the prophecy. We only dealt with 70 weeks. So let's go back to our chart. Let's go back to our 2,300 years. Now, I'm sorry to do this to you, but we're going to do a little bit of maths. I was going to ask you how much time we had left in this prophecy, but I've put that up for you. We've got 1,810 years to go. Where does that bring us to in time? Remember, we finished at 34 AD, so if we're going to add 1,810 years to that, we come to the date 1844. Now, this is rather interesting because you remember this prophecy, under 2,300 days, then will the sanctuary be cleansed. Daniel understood that there was going to be a getting rid of sin that was going to take place at that time. That, in fact, as we now realize, Christ, as the high priest, will get rid of sin at that time. But to get rid of sin, it presupposes that there must be a judgment. So what does that mean? If this prophecy takes us right up to the year 1844, is there a judgment that's taking place? You know, it's interesting. Revelation chapter 14 and verse 7, and we haven't looked at Revelation 14 yet. We will look at that in a future study. But it says there, fear God and give him glory, for the hour of his judgment, the hour of his judgment is come. Now, if you were to look back, if you were to flick back to Acts chapter 24 and verse 25, there you will see Luke talks, or Luke quotes one of the apostles saying, beware of the judgment to come. Now we get to Revelation 14:7, and 14:7 says the hour of his judgment is come. So the question that I think we really need to ask is, when and where does the final judgment take place? Now, to find the answer to that, we've got to go back into the Bible again, but we've had a 50-minute study here. Our time is up, and we don't have time to go back and look at that. So I'm going to leave that with you this week. This is the end of our study. As you may guess, next week we're going to pick up right here. We're going to answer that question, when and where does the final judgment take place? I think this is a very important study, and so I'm going to say to you, make sure, don't miss next week for the conclusion of this, because, well, it's really exciting. Personally, even I'm looking forward to it, and I know what the answer is. So we're going to stop the recording now.